The prairie rolled out like a sea of dying gold, its waves caught in the long breath of the wind. Overhead, clouds pressed heavy against the sky, blue turned to bruised lavender, the kind that promised rain but held back like a secret. A chestnut mare tore across the open land, hooves flinging up dust in rhythm with a heartbeat too fast, too tired. Her rider leaned low, bonnet untied, and whipping behind her like something fleeing too, a prayer left in the dust, a ribbon of memory unraveling behind her. She didn't look back, not because she was brave, but because behind her there was nothing worth facing anymore. She'd lost more than she'd carried when she left, and still she rode with a kind of urgency only grief understands. Her skirts were torn, her jaw clenched, her spine straight like someone daring the world to break her. It already had, and still she rode. The horse saw it first. The snake coiled like a knot of fire near the trail, tongue flicking into dry air. A snap of movement, a flare of terror, and then the mare twisted mid-gallop, muscles locking in panic. The girl didn't have time to think. The world tilted and fell beneath her. She hit the ground hard, ribs slamming into dirt, shoulder scraping rock. A burst of pain lit the world white. The sky spun above her, the cry she'd meant to scream stolen by the wind. Then only dust, settling slow like ash around her. Time passed, long or short, she couldn't say. The pain held her fast, anchored her to the earth like a broken fence post. The mare had bolted. Her breath came shallow. Something in her side pulsed wrong. But she didn't panic. This wasn't the first time the world had knocked the wind out of her. Might not be the last. The sound of hooves came next, slow, measured, no urgency. A shape dark against the gray horizon, steady and tall in the saddle. Not a mirage. Not salvation. Just someone coming because they'd seen something fall. He dismounted without words. A quiet man, not the kind to fill silence just to ease it. His hands were warm when they touched her, cautious and sure, smelling of cedar, leather, and dust. She saw his face only in pieces. The edge of a jaw, eyes under the brim of his hat, lines carved by sun and seasons. He asked no name, no reason, just gathered her like something precious but breakable, and lifted her to his horse with care most folks save for glass or graves. The ride back was a blur of pain and heartbeat. She rested against him, not from trust, but because there was nowhere else to lean. His coat was rough wool. His silence was the kind that didn't demand filling. He rode like the land belonged to him, not owned, but known. The house was small, tucked low into a bend of cottonwood and stone. The porch tilted like it listened to the wind. Light flickered behind thin curtains. A woman opened the door, older, with hair in a braid like silver rope and eyes that had seen enough not to ask questions. She helped the girl inside, eased her onto a cot, murmured about poultices and soup in a voice soft as worn cotton. That night, the girl lay still, every rib aching with breath. The guest room smelled of lavender and horses. Rain tapped at the window, timid but constant. She stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks, mapping them like roads she'd never take. Pain bloomed low in her side, dark and stubborn. She touched the bruise once, then let it be. In her dreams, a voice rose, sharp and angry, edges cutting like broken glass. The voice of a man who once called her wife, but never meant it with anything soft. She heard doors slam, footsteps follow, the quiet whimper of a child hidden beneath a quilt. She tried to wake, but the dream held tight. Somewhere, a rooster called into the dark. She woke to silence, not emptiness, but peace. The kind of quiet that doesn't press, doesn't question. The kind that says, you're not alone, but no one will make you speak. She lay there a long while, bruised, half-broken, but breathing. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't feel afraid. Not yet safe, but close. Closer than she'd ever been. The morning came gentle, like it knew she wasn't ready for sharp things yet. Mist hung over the field in silver ribbons, clinging to fence posts and the edges of the barn like breath still waiting to be exhaled. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of sage and wood smoke. Steam rose from the enamel cup in her hands, coffee dark and bitter, just the way the old woman had made it. Out past the paddock, he was already working. Hammer in one hand, wire pulled taut in the other, his figure steady against the fog. He didn't look up, but she knew she was watching. He always seemed to know things without needing to say them. That was the kind of man he was, quiet, not from shyness, but from choice. She watched the way he moved, deliberate and unfussy. No wasted effort. No showing off. Just a man fixing what was broken. Alone in the early hush of day. Something about it steadied her. Like watching rain soak into dry earth. By mid-morning, she asked if there was anything she could do. He didn't answer at first, just handed her a basket of eggs and pointed toward the hen house with a small tilt of his chin. That was his way, answering without answering. She didn't mind. Words had done enough harm in her life. Silence felt like clean air. Days fell into rhythm. She fed the chickens, mended attack, swept out the barn with long strokes that eased something locked in her chest. He chopped wood with a rhythm like breath. They passed tools, nodded thanks, shared shade beneath the same tree when the sun got mean. It wasn't conversation, but it was connection. He started leaving things near her door, small offerings that didn't ask for thanks. A pair of boots one morning, well worn but whole, laces wrapped neatly. She slid her feet into them, and they fit better than anything she'd worn in years. Later, she noticed a tear in his only decent shirt. That night, she stitched it quiet under the lamplight and folded it back onto the porch rail. There was peace in the way they existed side by side, neither one expecting more than the other could give. She didn't ask about his story, and he didn't dig into hers. But still, she wondered, what had made him choose solitude? What kind of ache had taught him to listen more than speak? One afternoon, while cleaning out her small satchel, she found the locket. The clasp was broken, the chain twisted. She turned it over in her palm like a stone pulled from a river. Inside, the photo was torn. One half held her face and the soft blur of a child's curls. The other half gone. She stared at it until her eyes blurred, then closed it gently and tucked it beneath her pillow. The ranch wasn't empty of people. There was a ranch hand named Eli. Young, all elbows and laughter too loud for the quiet this place held. He noticed her, in the way men sometimes notice things they think they can take. Joke too freely, step too close. One morning, when she was hanging wash, he grabbed a clothespin from her hand and winked like they shared some secret. She didn't smile. She told him firmly to keep his distance. No giggle, no sugar in her voice. Just steel wrapped in calm. He didn't like that. Walked away, muttering, a boy who didn't like being told no. Later, in the barn, the cowboy stood a little too near when Eli passed through. Nothing loud. No threats. Just presence. A look held too long. A message without words. From then on, Eli kept his eyes elsewhere. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. They understood each other that way. As the days stretched longer, she noticed things she hadn't before, the way he always made sure the gate was latched behind her, how he angled the porch chair toward the sunrise on the mornings he knew she'd be there. He never asked how she was sleeping, but he moved quieter in the evenings, like he didn't want to wake whatever haunted her. She found herself watching him sometimes, the way his hands were calloused but careful, the way he never raised his voice, even to the animals. She didn't want romance. Not now. Maybe not ever. But respect, that was something different. And safety, real safety, was a rare thing. She caught herself humming once while brushing the mare. A soft, tuneless thing from childhood. She hadn't made music in years. He passed by with a saddle in his hands and didn't say a word, but she noticed the way his shoulders shifted, like he'd heard something worth remembering. The days weren't easy, but they were quiet. And quiet, for her, was a kind of grace. In the long hush between evening and night, she sat on the porch again, blanket draped over her lap, the locket in her hands. The wind stirred the grass in the fields. She looked toward the barn, where his lantern still glowed through the slats. A life doesn't have to be loud to be full. Sometimes, the things that heal us don't speak at all. The storm came from south, crawling slow over the rim of the hills like a tired animal, low thunder rolling beneath it like a steady drumbeat. The heat broke just before dusk, and the air turned heavy with the scent of rain and something older. Wet sage, split cedar, dust that had waited too long to be washed away. They sat in the doorway of the barn, side by side on overturned crates, watching the clouds roll in like a dark tide. Neither spoke. There was no need. The land spoke enough for both of them. Cicadas going quiet, wind shifting strange, the first cold drop striking the dirt like a single heartbeat out of rhythm. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, not from chill, but habit. Old defenses didn't fall easy. He sat still beside her, elbows on his knees, hat tipped low. He didn't fidget, didn't fill the quiet, just waited. When she started speaking, it came like the rain, slow, sparse, and then all at once. She told him about the man she'd married young, with eyes too charming and hands too quick. How his laughter had always come with a sharp edge, and how she'd learned too late that kindness was just something he borrowed when it suited him. She spoke of a child, her girl, born into a house where broken things were never fixed, only hidden. Of the night she ran, bruised and barefoot, holding her daughter to her chest with nothing but a prayer. Of how the law hadn't seen what was behind his smile. Of how the court took the word of a man in clean boots over a woman who bled on her own front porch. Her daughter was taken, her voice ignored, and after that, she'd stopped trying to speak at all. She didn't look at him while she spoke. Her eyes stayed on the horizon where the lightning carved pale veins into the clouds. Her voice never rose. It had been loud once before, but now it lived somewhere deep, quiet, steady, shaped by all the years it had gone unused. He said nothing, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew she didn't need fixing. She needed witnessing, and that he offered fully, not with pity, not with fear, just with his presence. When her voice cracked, she turned her face away. Her shoulders trembled, barely, and then stopped. He didn't reach for her right away. But when her hand slid from her lap to the rough wood between them, he laid his palm over it, gently, like you'd place a blanket over someone already asleep. She didn't pull away. The tears came after that, quiet, without sobs. Just rain behind the eyes, finally allowed to fall. He didn't speak, didn't shift. His hand stayed, a steady weight that said, "I'm here. I believe you." That night, the storm passed overhead. Rain drummed the barn roof in rhythms like old lullabies. She didn't dream. In the days that followed, something in her changed. Not fast, not loud, but real. She started saddling her own horse again, hands still unsure but stronger. At first, she flinched at every sudden noise, every flick of the mare's ear. But the cowboy stood nearby, not to take over, just to be there. She asked questions, and he answered them with that same quiet ease. Explained how the saddle should sit, where the cinch should lie. Showed her how to feel the balance, how to let the horse know she was still at center, no matter what fear tried to say. And this time, the saddle didn't slip. One morning, she took the reins and rode out alone, just to the ridge and back. The wind in her hair felt like a hymn. When she returned, he was by the corral, mending a latch. She dismounted without a word. Their eyes met. She smiled, not wide but true. He nodded, and that was enough. They didn't speak much still. But the silence had changed. It wasn't empty. It was filled with things too sacred for words, shared glances, warm coffee, tools left where the other would find them. Trust. One evening, while leading her mare into the barn, their fingers brushed. His hand reaching for the bridle, hers letting go. A pause. A flicker. Just the barest contact. She looked at him. He looked back. Nothing was said. But the air between them thickened like smoke from a slow fire. Nothing burned, but something warmed. Later, she sat on the porch and watched the stars prick open one by one. She held her locket in her palm, and for the first time didn't close it with a prayer. Just let it stay open, breathing in the night air. The fire that once scorched her life hadn't burned her down. It had made space. And in that space, something new was beginning to grow. Quietly, steadily, like love that doesn't demand, only stays. The wind carried it in, an envelope sealed in red wax, corners curled slightly, like even the air itself had tried to keep it from arriving. It was left on the porch rail that morning, tucked beneath a chipped mug, the kind of quiet arrival that held too much weight in too little paper. She found it just after sunrise, when the sky was still soft and unsure. The coffee in her hands had gone cold by the time she broke the seal. Her fingers trembled, but not from a chill. The letter was short, formal, the kind of words written by someone who didn't care much for softness. Her husband was dead, gone in the night, no details given. But her daughter lived, was safe. And the family, those who'd once stood on the wrong side of truth, now asked if she'd come, if she'd see the girl, if maybe they could put the past down just long enough to open something new. She sat a long time after reading. The wind flipped the page again and again, as though trying to erase it. But the word stayed. Inside, she folded the letter and placed it in the locket, just behind the torn photo. She didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later. He found her on the porch, still wrapped in silence, the sunrise gold against her face. He didn't ask what the letter said. Didn't need to. She told him anyway, voice low. A whisper too heavy to carry alone. When she finished, she waited for him to speak. To tell her what to do. To warn or question or fix. But he just nodded once and said, "You've already done the hardest part. Whatever comes next, you don't have to do it alone." She rode out the next day. He rode beside her, steady and sure. Not leading, not following. Just there. The sound of hooves on packed dirt, the open road ahead. No destination more frightening than the thoughts inside her. But he didn't press. He let her ride in silence, let her fear rise and settle like dust behind them. The town hadn't changed much. Same lean buildings, same windows that watched. But the courthouse loomed taller than she remembered, like memory had stretched it into something bigger, crueler. Inside, it smelled of sweat and old ink. Her brother-in-law waited with arms crossed, face drawn sharp with old bitterness. He saw her and scoffed, loud enough for the walls to echo. Called her a runaway, a liar, unfit. Said she'd lost the right to that child the moment she turned her back. She didn't flinch. The sheriff stepped forward then, a quiet man, but firm. Told the brother to lower his voice. Told him the papers had been filed. Guardianship questioned. The court had already started to see what had been done. That's when she realized. Someone had helped her. Quietly. Before she even knew how to ask. She turned to the cowboy. His hat brim was low, arms folded. He didn't say a word, but he looked at her with eyes that told her, you weren't alone. Not even then. The rest passed in blurs. Signatures. Nods. A slow unraveling of a knot that had been tangled too tight for too long. She didn't feel victory. Only release. Outside, in the park behind the courthouse, the grass was damp from last night's rain. She stood beneath the wide arms of a sycamore and waited. The girl came running, smaller than she remembered, older somehow. Hair in braids. Eyes wide and searching. She didn't stop to ask. Just ran. The moment their arms met, the world stopped. She sank to her knees, pulled the girl close, breathed in the scent of her hair like it might disappear. They cried into each other's shoulders, the kind of crying that shakes loose everything too long held in. And he stood nearby, a quiet shadow under a wide sky, not interrupting, just witnessing, always witnessing. That night, they rode home slow. The girl slept between them, her head resting against the cowboy's back, his coat wrapped around her small frame. The stars blinked open, one by one, as though the heavens themselves were making space. Back at the ranch, a second plate sat on the table. A blanket laid out on the couch. The woman tucked her daughter in gently, smoothing the curls away from her face. The child murmured something in her sleep, something close to Mama. She stepped outside then into the hush of evening, where he sat on the porch, hands resting on his knees. She didn't speak, just sat beside him. He looked out toward the fields, eyes soft beneath the weight of dusk. Then, without turning, said, "You can stay if you want." She didn't answer, just reached out, found his hand, and laid hers over it. Sometimes a fall isn't the end. Sometimes it's how you land in the arms of the life you were always meant for. And out here, in the quiet of the West, love don't shout. It waits. It watches. And when you're ready, it rides beside you.